Christ came in the fullness of time. Think about it. When the announcement is made after the fall that there will be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and that the serpent would bruise his heel, but that this seed of the woman would crush his head, there is a promise made. The promise that this deliverer would come, but Adam and Eve never saw that promised deliverer. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob believed and hoped, but they never saw this deliverer come. We go into Egypt and Moses comes and God delivers his people out of Egypt, out of bondage. He delivers his law carved in tablets to his people. They get to see the coming of the law of God. They get to see Mount Sinai, but they don't get to see the Messiah. David comes. The nation is established and experiences its golden era with David and his son Solomon, but they don't get to see the coming of Messiah. The great temple is built, but they don't get to see the coming of the Messiah. The prophets come and they proclaim, but they don't get to see the coming of the Messiah. Why? Because it was not the fullness of time. An old saying, he may not come when you want him, but he's always right on time. That's important news, beloved, because that's not just true of the coming of our deliverer, but it's also true of the coming of our deliverance. Is anybody praying for a wayward child? Is anybody wrestling with heartache, disappointment? Is anybody trying desperately to hold on to hope and beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, God is not paying attention? Listen, in the fullness of time. By the way, for Adam and Eve and for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and David and Solomon and for all of the prophets, what that meant was fullness of time will come after you're gone. But it will come. There's another point here, or principle here. When the fullness of time had come, that word time, Christ came in time. He came into time. The incarnation is not just myth, it is fact, it is history. And in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, and here's where we start to have a problem. The story of a baby in a manger can bring comfort to all, but the story of the Son of God being wrapped in flesh is an entirely different thing. You don't build $11 million trees in Abu Dhabi hotels to the Son of God. You only do that if you are ignoring, denying the reality that in the fullness of time, God sent forth not just a baby, God sent forth not just a man, but God sent forth his son. Which means God sent forth God. I love the fact that we have the entire Trinity in this passage. Listen to it again. But when the fullness of time had come, God, there's the Father, sent forth his Son. So there's God the Father and God the Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Talk about some theology of Christmas. We have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit here in this text. The incarnation is about the reality of our triune God. It is about the breaking into time and to history of our triune God. It is about the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity. It is about God the Son wrapping himself, clothing himself in flesh. It is about his humiliation before his exaltation. And his humiliation is not just the cross. His humiliation is stepping out of heaven and stepping into this world. That's the theology of Christmas. God sent forth his Son. And then God sent forth his Son, born of a woman. Well, the first and second century Gnostics were driven crazy by this. I mean, it would have been fine. They could have believed that God would come and that God would manifest himself, but the idea that God would be born, the idea that God would clothe himself in humanity, the idea that God would come not to stand on a mountain in all of his glory, but that he would come as an embryo. What a beautiful reality. That Christ wraps himself and clothes himself in humanity, but that he wraps himself and clothes himself in all of humanity. This is why we believe in the sanctity of every human life from the moment of conception. Because God himself says, if I'm going to send my son and my son is going to be a man, that means my son is going to start in the womb of a woman. Because that's where humanity begins. Beautiful theology of Christmas. This hypostatic union where Christ is fully God. God sends forth his Son. He's fully God and he's fully man, born of a woman. Why is this so important? Born under the law. Christ is born under the law. He wasn't just born to be born, he was born under the law to redeem those who were under the law. Why? Well, because we have a couple of problems. Our redemption required not only that Christ die for our sin, but that he live a perfect, righteous life and keep the law on our behalf. It is his active and his passive obedience. In his active obedience as one born under the law, Christ keeps the law perfectly so that he might impute that perfect righteousness to us. The righteousness that we do not have, the alien righteousness that is Christ's righteousness that becomes ours by faith. And then in his passive obedience, this perfect one has our sins placed on him so that he might pay the penalty that we owe for not keeping the law that he kept. And his active and his passive obedience is what allows for that double imputation. My sin imputed to Christ and nailed to the tree, and his righteousness imputed to me so that I stand before God redeemed. To redeem those who were under the law. That's the theology of Christmas. Not just the story of a baby. So that we might receive adoption as sons. God sent forth his Son, not just to redeem his people from their sins, but so that his Son might make us sons and daughters.
Please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more truth and to spread the light of Jesus Christ.